And we've been told and taught that curiosity is the knowledge emotion, because if you're going to feel, and feel, what you're trying to learn, then you're going to have to be curious.
This is Advertising in Africa with Dele Odugbemi on Africa Business Radio.
Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Advertising in Africa with me, Dele Odugbemi. Today I have with me a friend and a business partner, Gbonju Akingbade, who, as you will find, is a very interesting character. Not talking about the comedy side just yet, just still, on the advertising front. Today we're going to share a topic that has been bugging my mind for a while, which is something around the paradox of what creativity is. And why I find Gbonju to be the right person to share that, kind of thoughts with is his background, being someone who's come out of what isn't conventionally linked to advertising, and then applied his mind then to, advertising, and therefore, in my view, he's one of those very few people I've met in the course of my journey that has a different outlook to what advertising is. But I then, in reflecting on the topic when I thought about it, that it's actually also suitable because that perspective is actually the topic itself. That is, what is creativity? What is it when you draw? Yeah. Or the concept behind the drawing? Yeah. That what really is creative. So, Gbonju, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Do I call you Dele or Bob D?
Dele is fine. No, the Bob D part is very complicated. Thanks for coming. As I've introduced the topic, I would like that you take it firstly, though, from your background, and I'd like that you share just for those who don't know you. Right. And then now we can then put what you would then share about it in the right perspective.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, Bob D, I am an outsider in the industry. So I found myself in a few situations that led to this journey. So at the beginning, I studied architecture. I'd never considered myself creative, never. But I do trace when I think back and when I do these sessions, I have to reflect. And I think of the first time I ever did anything that I would consider creative. I was in year 5 in primary school, and I was meant to do a piece of art. And I did not know what to do. So I just I did a mask, and I split the mask in half. And one side was bright orange, and the other side was black. And I got the highest score. That was all. Okay. I just painted this mask black and orange. End of. And from that day on, I'm like, oh, so it's this easy. Well, it wasn't. So, in primary school, and those that went to, schools like I did, the way you sort of entertain yourself was to draw creative characters, whether it was a Marvel character, a DC character, and then all the cool kids could really draw. And then they had these mini books where they'd drawn so many characters and they could flip it and they could animate. And you was like, when am I ever gonna, learn to draw? So anyway, fast forward, I wanted to become an engineer. My dad said no. He said, you're going to be a lawyer. You should talk for a living. I said no. And the middle ground was he forced me into applying for architecture. So I got accepted, and I got there and they were like, all right, so everyone here must have done fine arts in secondary school.
Oh boy.
No, I did not. There's a course in Nigeria called technical drawing. Said everyone must have done that. No, I did not. And so I literally had to learn everything in year 1. I had to sit with a lot of people learning how do you draw, how do you communicate visually. It was difficult, and I flunked every single course that had to do with drawing. But I ended up somehow, graduating as an architect, and I, did not enjoy working as an architect. I was thrown to, work on the fields and inspect buildings or supervise construction. That was tough again. And I found my way I was working in a company at the time. It's a radio company, Cool FM, and they had an architectural firm. And there was a guy there that sat on the last row, and he used a software called CorelDRAW. And I'll never forget. And he was creating these amazing posters. I was like, oh, you saw the architecture, I said, yeah, all my friends do it, but I don't know how to do it. He said, okay, it's easier. And he just, showed me. I was like, oh, no. I said, I don't have CorelDRAW on my computer in the office. He said, but you have PowerPoint. Like, yes, I do. Say, oh, you can do it in PowerPoint. And so I started designing in PowerPoint. And I designed in PowerPoint all the way to, I started working in comms, and I became this PowerPoint person. And that's how it started. Posters and what have you. This led to the company that I run now, which is part of a larger group of companies, and we found our way into advertising again accidentally. When you start with visual communication, somebody's going to come and say, help me do a press ad. All right, press ad. Yeah, and you have to write the copy of the press ad. And so my wife fortunately said, you guys are really good. I think you should, come into the advertising industry. And I was like, nah, no. And that's imposter syndrome. And she said, I've seen the things you do. If you come in, you're going to take everybody's lunch. So we had this brief from a beverage brand. I don't know whether I'm allowed to mention the beverage brand.
Sure.
Oh yeah. So Gulda came, and they had this positioning about manliness and being, this real man. And my wife was working on the campaign at the time in her digital agency, and they were like, look, they need this creative idea, a big idea. I didn't even know what a big idea was or a long idea. I had no idea what any idea was. But I was lucky enough I'm a fan of observing culture, and I was in Sapele at the time with a group of young graduates, training them. And I noticed every time we called somebody up to receive end of course certificate, the person would say, Naman you be. I'm like, okay, this might work for this this ad. So I started testing it, and I got back and I said, Buki, I kind of have this idea, and I said it. She's like, it's genius. And so it became our first big pan-Nigerian ad, and it became a reference for pretty much any outdoor campaign so far. So anytime, I see counter reports or, what have you, they always reference the ad as the way to contextualize culture in communication and in creativity. And so that's how, I ended on this journey, and it's been advertising.
Yeah, it's really interesting to know that before this episode, I was actually reviewing a document talking about how well to use outdoor, and that was the example. Basically because it's few words, but very imposing. So it was a large font, Naman you be, and that it worked. It was a post-mortem report of how that worked. And, taking us back to what we're talking about, therefore, that creativity is therefore not about this school.
Yes.
Because there is that thinking that there is the artist.
Yes.
That is creative.
Yes.
And it is the business that is creative.
Correct.
It's a creative business, which means that I, for example, started on the media side, and what we were required to do was to try and find within placements how you could stand out. So you could deliberately choose to be the first ad on NTA News Network because you wanted a certain kind of impact.
Okay.
Or you could decide to be the last ad. So within all of those elements, there are things to move, and that started developing my mind about what creativity means. That aren't we talking the business rather than the product?
The product itself, yes.
Because the tendency is to think the product. Of course, the ad is creative. So much effort has gone into that. You've got copywriters, you've got, art directors, you've got, all of those people that put so much into it.
Yeah.
So that when you then now take a few steps backward and realize, okay, if the business is what is creative, the question is, what other things can that be linked to? I.e., is at the moment linked to advertising.
Yeah.
That's the, a brief,
a
lot of shaking in the room, and then that becomes a product. But that there is a broader possible use of that skill set.
Yes.
If people start thinking of what they do differently.
Correct.
And say that creativity is not about the end product.
Yeah.
It's about putting a lot into what you're doing that then lets that end product become creative. So, and back to the point I made earlier, that you, in that journey, because you didn't start from that framework, you started with almost like with a mindset. And that's why I thought you're such a very good person to talk to about, let's demystify this creative thing. Let it be about putting stuff out there that, I can be creative even though I'm not an artist.
No, and you're absolutely right. I think so. I have moved, from, because there's this general question that is everyone creative? That's where I am now. I think every single person is. What the seed for creativity is curiosity. And we've been told and taught that curiosity is the knowledge emotion, because if you're going to fuel, and feel, what you're trying to learn, then you're going to have to be curious. And so if I try to contrast it to when we started trying to look at the different fields when it came to even design, we found that, you have those that think logically and they're designers, and then you have those that think, for lack of a better word, wildly, and they're designers. And so if you think about a fine artist and a graphic artist, right? The fine artist would usually produce art for art's sake. And then the graphic artist tends to be a bit more rigid.
Purpose.
Yes, purpose. And so in every field, and when we're trying to recruit, you go into engineering, right? And you find that there's creativity in engineering, whether it's in designing cars, laptops, what have you. You have those that have to help think creatively. There was a great story I heard about when the iWatch was being designed, and they had all these engineers there. And they brought in fashion designer, they brought in a linguistic expert, and they brought in all these different people, because at the end of the day, when looking at the product, the infusion from these different fields is what contributes to the final product. If you leave engineers to design a car, there's nobody that's going to ever use that car, So, and it's the reason why, in the work you do, whether you are even in financial accounting, for example, it's important. I don't think you should be creative with numbers to the extent.
I was going to say.
But, again, it's a very left brain practice. But within that practice, you then see, even if it's not in the final output, but just in the understanding and trying to communicate that understanding of, the work they're doing, then comes the creativity. And that's why you can attend, let's say, an ACCA course, that's been taught by an accountant, and two different accountants. They teach the same, but in different ways, and you're able to learn that in different. So yeah, I see now that, creativity is a gene, and I think everybody's got that gene, and you just have to constantly sort of walk in the tension of that, to say, am I pushing this thing too far, or am I playing it too safe?
Now, because we're in a multicultural world, obviously, the question is also asked sometimes about, can creativity be applied across multiple cultures? In which case, what is appropriate or fitting or representative of one culture? Is that possible to cut across? That's like, there have been so many attempts to develop what they will call global campaigns. And, the pushback is always this thing about fit, about, the nuances and why one works in one location and so what role, therefore, does your local context play in your ability to be creative? That if a person culturally is, for example, us Africans were taught oral tradition, whereas there are other cultures that are more, in terms of how they transfer information, is more written. It could be abstract, but it's written. So obviously what is oral and what's abstract, despite being written, is completely different. So we give the context. So is it possible that something can work across, that people can be deliberate to recognize, okay, a bit of abstract, a bit of oral, and then just combo?
No.
Is that possible?
So I think there are two things here. The first thing is what's true. And we've discovered that there are universal truths. So for example, a mother will love her child.
Yes.
It's a universal truth. So if I'm trying to speak to a mother, I can tap into that insight. It's true. However, where the dissonance comes in, it's in communication. It's the language. So the language is where it always differs. And that's what we found, that the insight may be universal, but the communication never is.
If I break that down, the visual cues,
or even the verbal cues,
could be generic, but that tone, language, all of that will register differently.
It would always register differently. That's correct. So if you think about hand gestures, for example, so we both, I'm walking down, maybe the Champs-Élysées in Paris. I see Dele. I feel, I want to say hello to Dele. That feeling is a universal feeling. But if I, stick 5 fingers at Dele, Dele might say, oh my goodness, this guy is, insulting me. And that's where it always differs. It's always in the final, it's in the way it's communicated, the way it translates to you. So when I see a global campaign, like the ads at the Super Bowl, there's always something universally emotive about them. but it doesn't usually translate without the context. Yeah. So if I don't have the context, I really don't know what a hot dog, in New York means. Like, I don't get why you're excited. What does that mean? So, and I think, that's the lesson. We are still waiting for the universal language. I think, even with social media and digital today, we found that things begin to translate a little more. So if you're on TikTok, for example, and I think I'm too old to be on TikTok. I find
we'll let your kids decide.
Yes, I find that I see young people bridging that communications gap. So they're singing African songs, and they can be from Asia, they're dancing to it, and they're all communicating. Similar things happen, in the world of esports. So you're, playing Fortnite. You'd find that children of different languages and barriers are able to translate one message. So Fortnite is that platform that then brings all these different things together, and then they do what's called the emote. So that emote means the same thing. So if two people that play Fortnite are walking on the street, they can emote to each other. Job's done. And I think we're getting to that point where we're going to have these platforms that would foster this integration, and then you can truly, genuinely have a universal campaign.
The reason I was asking is, yes, fine, the campaigns, but what also the campaigns translate into is some sort of reward, which is cans, lorries, and that tends to be how advertising or creativity
want to measure
is celebrated. So if there cannot be, as at yet anyway, it would seem like the struggle is in language or whatever the struggle is, but there is a struggle, obviously, that doesn't let one fit all, right? So which means what is creative maybe in the Western world is something that maybe we'll question here, and therefore the same thing, vice versa. Therefore, should we be seeking validation elsewhere as Africans? Should we, instead of desiring of an African to win a kind of award, when those who would judge it more than likely do not have the context of where it's from, should we be seeking that level of validation, or is validation actually best at the level to which it has context? In which case, a Yoruba movie should seek to win an Oscar. It perhaps should be maybe aiming for the Africa Magic Award instead, or even if you produced, like Etel produced some Yoruba ads at some point that then had like subtitling and all that, because I felt what they were trying to communicate was deeper in the language, and they allowed for that to happen. So at what level should creativity be rewarded, I suppose?
I think, and I'm not a fan of awards, and it's because usually the awarding body is always biased. So if I think about it in the world of sports, I don't expect a great footballer like Ronaldo to win the Super Bowl. That's never going to happen, right? So why do we then expect the same thing when it comes to, the space in which we're in? I think if we do have what's more like a governing body that's universal, and then have universal rules, then it's easy to say, I'm going to have the World Cup and every single country is going to participate in the World Cup, and then that way I can measure, because everyone seeks validation. I think that's why, as human beings. So if the largest platform is in Fiji, then we want to go to Fiji. And even if we've never been to Fiji, but if that's where it is, that's where we want to go. We want to cut our teeth with the best, and amongst the best. But I think the industry has to recognize what you said, and it has to change to play by some sort of linear, level playing field. We have to be able to construct something that works for everyone. So what we want to measure is that thing that can be measured and that really truly matters, But you're right. I don't see what's the Nigerian movie? I think Wedding Crashers.
Wedding Planners.
Wedding Planners. Is it Wedding Planners? Are you sure?
Is that Wedding Crashers? I haven't seen Wedding Crashers.
It's Wedding Party.
Wedding Party. What did I say? Wedding Planner.
You said Wedding Planner.
Right. Yeah, Wedding Party. You're right. The question I asked actually stemming from a conversation I had with a gentleman that was a global creative director at the time. We invited him for an Africa conference. And he sat with us 1 week, Monday to Friday. And on Friday, we asked him to judge all the creatives that people were presenting. And he told us he was very disappointed.
Oh, wow.
And that struck us, we were very shocked. This is a Danish guy who lives in New York. who was revered, still is, and yet he was saying to all those creative heads across Africa that he was disappointed. So we were thinking, well, he couldn't know our context anyway, but he said something interesting about his disappointment. It wasn't about the creativity, which was what we thought it was. It was the originality.
Oh.
He said to himself as he was evaluating each one, this ad could have played in New York and I wouldn't even have known it was African.
Oh.
That when we don't even score our ads with our own songs. We wanted, so they would just take us, so it's lovers, it's for close up and all that. I just go with the European.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's African about that? The fact that they're two black people, they could have been anywhere in the world. And that there are dimensions that we can begin to take a look at that can let us own it more.
Okay.
i.e. unpack everything, model that. Okay, so his point, let's not forget, is that it's not the model that makes it African.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think maybe we, in trying to adapt global ads, we got the models to be black, and then yippee, we're African now, that kind of thing. And there was none that had, in all those that were presented, had an African score. But in having said that, one of the guys, remember, there was an ad they had that actually had one and played it, and they showed us that didn't it move you? Actually, the fact that the song was authentic African and all of that, sometimes you hear things and you think some of it you can dismiss, but that was something that never left me. That we need to consciously start getting into a mindset of, what is creative is also in part kind of like us digging into where we are, digging up things that are original to us, and that we start looking at audiences beyond us. Because we would think, here's what I always say about an ad locally, would be like, it resonates. Like the people get the people get it and it resonates. So maybe it's some narration or whatever it is. But realistically, should we have that ambition about maybe what we're putting together can be rewarded elsewhere? It would be that originality that would strike. I don't know if you've seen Squid Game.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. What are the chances of that thing, let's say they ran on NTA, happening? But it was on Netflix, right? It was already on the global platform. So you gave it a context.
Yes.
In a foreign language that was subtitled. You gave it its own context and look at that and said, okay, maybe there's something here. You could give it its chance because
I guess you're not a fan.
It was original to that location rather than them trying to. So that's why I didn't want to lose that thought, that it would seem that rather than think of the creative person as the artist, rather than think of what's creative to be a local adaptation of what's foreign, that it would seem it's actually more about the authenticity, and the originality, the cross-functional thinking, all of that produces product that then is so unique that whether it's Squid Game or it's Wedding Planner,
it comes organically,
it gets a chance.
So I'm of a different mindset.
Please share.
And the challenge is because I see everything as shades of grey. Now I'm sort of like, what is creativity? What is art? You have contemporary art, you have modern art, you have, these things that you can't really put a finger on. Somebody squeezes a piece of paper, puts it in a museum and they say, hey, that's art, right? TITI, a famous, so she can say, I've got my 2 kids here, I'm going to take a picture and I'm going to put it up for $1 million. That is art. And so in the same vein, when I look at, the work we do, it's sometimes the audience decides, and they decide with their wallet, they decide with their, their fan love, they decide. So I'm not a fan of the Airtel ads, for example. I just think they're polarizing, I'm sitting there, in my dashiki, I'm from the north, and there's this person speaking the language, and I'm like, oh, okay, what's he saying? I have no clue. But then beside me, there's somebody that loves it so much because it resonates. It polarizes me, and I don't like polarizing ads. On the other hand, it's very authentic, it's very original, And it worked. It had deep resonance. So then you look at the 080 Naija for Life ad, which sort of took a complete non-player in the industry and became a main player.
It's a song.
Yeah, and it was it's a foreign ad that they tried to localize. Everything about it was foreign. The music was foreign. The graphics were foreign. It was street culture, but it was not our street culture. But it really then began this wave, and you had all these young people, whether they were even with other telco companies, using that ringtone of a different mobile company as they had. So, and in that sense, you then go and it's time to reward them. Is it the one that sort of made business sense and then created this new audience, or is it the one that it tried really and resonated deeply? And so that's where I am. I'm always like, you know what, and this is the beauty of creativity, where sometimes you just blur the lines, and you have each person speaking their own truth, and then you applaud it.
So, in your view, what is the post-pandemic creative world going to be like?
Oh, it's definitely a virtual world, a digital world, a Fortnite world. That's what it is. Collaboration across multiple markets, and in different languages. I think it's actually a really, really good thing. I think so.
Is Africa there? Given we have infrastructural challenges and so on?
Well, I think we're there. I'm not sure how deep the infrastructural challenges are limiting now. I think access has been improved due to devices being more powerful. I mean, the devices we have now, are more powerful than the ones that sent Sputnik to the moon. I think where the challenge is, it's in the rigor and the discipline. I think that's always been our challenge. There's this sense that everything has to be, microwave. You push a button and it's done. And so when you meet someone and say, all right, tell me about your idea, and they don't bring a notepad, like you couldn't be bothered to even write it down. No, I'm a Gen Z. I've got everything in my head. So when it then gets to creative, you're like, all right, can you not sketch, what you're trying to say? Even if it's the layout of a floor plan, or even if it's a media plan, just scribble it down, and they're like, no. So that rigor is what's taught, because you learn things first principles, and it's taught in developed markets. But here, you wake up, you pick up a mobile phone, and you're an influencer, you're an artist, you can't play an instrument, you can't do it. Yeah. So I think that's where Africa struggles.
Famous for being famous.
Famous, yes. Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. It's a dynamic that is already here, so it's not something that we're still trying to check out what the impact would be. My fear, I suppose, is we seem to have stumbled onto it, and when you do, then you don't tend to maximize the ecosystem. You don't tend to convert what could turn out to be what the commercial opportunities truly are. And on that note, I'd like to thank you so much, Gbonju, for
thank you very much,
sharing your knowledge and skill set with us on this topic. It's something that we can't possibly have done justice to over the 30 minutes or so of this talk. So it's a talk I'm hoping to continue to share at another time, because as you pointed out, it's so alive. It's that was created for the ghouls, it's not created for the Ghana, and therefore is a topic that rumbles on. But I mean, your perspective of it has been quite interesting. Again, as I thought it would be, because it's come from the framework of that outsider. But that's really what I love about it, that we take a second look at what creativity means. We take it beyond the artwork and the product and start examining the process. And in doing that, hopefully we can uncover a lot more. So again, thanks for your time. So if you want to follow more about me, you could find me on LinkedIn. My handle is Dele Odugbemi. And Gbonju, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn as well. It's Gbonju Akingbade. Okay. And on Twitter and on Instagram.
He's everywhere. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Dele. All right.